Okay, today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Mem Vav. Shavua Tov to everyone. Nice to have you back on the Zoom. Today's daf is sponsored by Dodi Lam in memory of her sister Judy Young, Yehudis Liba Bat Shprinza, Aleh Shalom. My sister's whole life revolved around teaching Torah, being Mekarev the disenchanted, and dedicating herself to her beautiful family. She had an abundance of energy and radiated that love of life to all those she encountered far and wide. Her motto was, "How can I make Hashem proud of me?" We are all proud of her. And by Mark and Debbie Ziering in memory of Mark's mother, Leah Bat Mazalta and Yosef on her yurtzeit. Lee was a dignified woman who raised her family dedicated to the values of modesty and commitment to Judaism. Okay, we're going to start with our daf, Sukkah Mem Vav. It's another one of those pages where you're going to learn all sorts of things that don't exactly correspond with what we actually do. So again, it's going to be one of those, really, this is what it says, and this seems quite clear, so let's see. So we started off with a strange thing at the end of yesterday's daf, which was this machloket about how many days. By the way, there's a sheet. I don't know if somebody put it up in the chat, but there's a sheet for today on most of the daf. I didn't finish the whole thing, but got through some of it. Hopefully the sheets will be regular now that I'm back. So you can look at the sheet. It's charted out, the three opinions. It's kind of two opinions, which really splits into three because there's two different opinions about what Rabbi Yochanan himself held. So we started with Lulav Shiva v'Sukkah Yom Echad. That's Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, which is you make a bracha on the Lulav all 7 days, but you only make a bracha on the Sukkah once. Right? This again is clearly not what we do. And what's the reason? Because Lulav is a break every day, because every day you're obligated in the day, you're not obligated at night, and therefore it's a new mitzvah every day, so you make a bracha. Sukkah, it's one long extended mitzvah because it's all day and all night, and therefore we view it as one mitzvah, and you only make one bracha. Okay, we'll see today another comparison to another similar mitzvah that you might not have thought they were similar, but similar in the sense that it's continuous, and would you make a bracha on something that's continuous or not, and we'll see. The second opinion is Rabbi Bar Khan in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who says the reverse. Sukkah is 7 days because it's d'oraita. Lulav is only on the first day, right? Again, 7 days meaning you make a bracha. Everyone agrees you have to do both 7 days. It's just a matter, do you make a blessing? So Sukkah, you make a bracha all 7 days. Lulav, it's only 1 day because remember, Lulav is only by Torah law 1 day. By the rabbis, it's the rest of the week. That's just Zecher L'Mikdash. You don't make a bracha on that. It's only a d'Rabbanan. Then we have a third opinion, which is, but again, maybe really only a second, which is what did Rabbi Yochanan really say? And according to Ravin, and this is what we do, echad zeh v'echad zeh shiva. Both Sukkah and Lulav you do for 7 days. Then Rabbi Yosef had said, take Rabbi Bar Chan's opinion, because all the Amoraim hold like him by Sukkah. Not clear exactly what he would say by Lulav. But now comes a big meitive, and this is from the Tosefta. And here opens up a whole interesting issue, which we'll get to a little bit more in depth later in the daf. But the topic of this Tosefta is not exactly what we're looking for, because we're looking for how many days do you make a bracha, but it does come up in this Tosefta. And that's why they quote it here. So in the Tosefta, it says, when you build a sukkah for yourself, okay, which seems to be only if you do it for lulav. If you make a lulav, what does it mean to make a lulav? You bind the lulav together with all the aravot, hadassim. You prepare your lulav. Rashi points out, just so you don't think, right, anything other, be'erev Yom Tov, we're talking, it's not even the holiday. You're just preparing your lulav. You make a bracha shechianu. When you take it to fulfill the mitzvah, the next day, then you say al netilat lulav. So we separate, right? This is not what we do. We make a shechianu when we make the bracha al netilat lulav at the first time. So this seems to have shechianu when you do it for yourself. Okay, it seems to be only for yourself. Rashi even points out below la'acherim, not for other people. And this seems to be that, right? So I see Gita, you're writing. Even this isn't Gita. You're asking, is this support for the opinion that the lulav tzarech egev, Rabbi Yehuda, but it's not, because we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, and it seems, even if you don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, seems like even the egev, which is just ze'eli v'amveu, just to beautify it, but still you're preparing the lulav, getting it ready to be used, that in and of itself has a certain amount of simcha, happiness, excitement about the mitzvah. You should make your shechianu then. Next, okay, Now, here comes the key line again. I say key line. This actually seems already key and very interesting and fascinating. But really, why did we bring it in the Gemara? Because of the next line. You ready? Even though you made a bracha on the first day, you already know where this is going, because it's even though, you're going to make that bracha all 7 days. Now remember, Rabbi Bar Chana said, lulav, only 1 day. And here he said, you make it all 7 days. The Tosefta continues. You make a sukkah for yourself. You build it. Omer, same thing. Again, something we don't do. You make a shachianu when you build the sukkah. I'll already tell you now. The Tosfot quotes the Yerushalmi. If you look at the third line on the first Tosfot of the page. V'i katana detane b'Yerushalmi b'perek haroeh. Asa'a la'atzmo mevarech la'asot sukkah. Asa'a la'acher mevarech la'asot sukkah lishmo. He says that when you build your sukkah, you make a bracha also on the building of the sukkah, right? I don't know if you thought about this, but it's strange to make a shachianu without making a bracha. Normally, you do a shachianu on a mitzvah, like take Hanukkah candles. You do la'adlik ner shel Chanukah, and then you say shachianu, you'll say shas anisim, but that's a whole separate thing. We're actually going to get to all of Hanukkah today anyway. Maybe that's why I thought of that mitzvah. It's on my mind. But normally, if you make a shachianu with a bracha on a mitzvah, so you say the bracha on the mitzvah, and then you make the shachianu. This is strange that the shachianu kind of stands on its own. By lulav, there is no such bracha, but according to the Yerushalmi, you make a bracha on building the sukkah. It's as if it's its own mitzvah. Okay? We don't paskin that way, but right, we don't even paskin like this Tosefta that says you make a shachianu. And now here comes the line that's going to, right, so then you make a shachianu. When you go to sit in the sukkah, nichnas le'shev ba, omer asher k'disham satzivanu le'shev basukkah. Then you make a bracha to sit in the sukkah. Here comes the line we're looking for our purposes. The kevan sheberech yom rishon shuv eino mevarech. Since you already made the bracha on the sukkah the first day, you don't make a bracha on the sukkah again. Same thing we saw before, right? The opposite of Rabbi Bar Chana. This matches exactly Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, which is the exact opposite of Rabbi Bar Chana. So they bring this as a question. We're going to get back to the shachianu topic in a little bit, okay? Because the Gemara is going to quote another braita about this later, and then we'll talk about it. This isn't what interests the Gemara at this point. Kasha lulav alulav, kasha sukkah sukkah. So we have this problem, this contradiction with Rabbi Bar Chana, which doesn't match this Tosefta at all. And again, rules are, if you're an Emora, you can't contradict a braita, Tosefta, something from the Mishnah time period, unless, right? Well, we'll see two options here anyway, unless you can say they're talking about different circumstances. Or, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but I'm going to give you the two that we're going to use here. One is you say they're talking about different circumstances. And number two, you could say, oh, I hold by a different Tanaitic opinion. This is just one opinion in a machloket. So first they're going to raise it in the format of a bishlama. A bishlama is, well, we have two problems. One is sukkah and lulav, right? Contradiction. And then we're going to say, well, one of them we have an easy answer for, the other one not so much. And then we'll resolve the other one as well. Bishlama lulav lo kasha. Very simple. Lulav, 7 days you make a bracha. Lulav, 1 day you make a bracha. What's the difference? Kam bizman shebeit hamikdash kayam. Okay, the Tosefta that says you're going to make a bracha on the lulav every day. They're talking about when the temple was around. When the temple was around, it was a mitzvah to take the lulav in the temple all 7 days. So you make a bracha all 7 days. Kam bizman she'ein beit hamikdash kayam. But when the temple is no longer standing, then we say, then the first day is d'oraita, the rest of the days are d'Rabbanit. We don't make a bracha anymore, okay, on all those days. So that's his resolution. But ela sukkah kasha. But I still don't have a good answer for sukkah. On sukkah, you can't answer temple times, not temple times. The mitzvah of sukkah is the same, whether the temple is there or not. So the answer is, I promised before, Tanai. It's a machloket tanaim. But in fact, when they quote that as machloket tanaim, they're not going to quote a sugya by sukkah. They're going to quote a sugya about tefillin. And they're going to say it's just like tefillin. Okay, we're going to compare sukkah for 7 days to tefillin every day. Okay, like on a one day at a time basis. Tefillin for today, let's say, okay, is like sukkah for all 7 days. Why? Because tefillin is a mitzvah during the day and not at night. So the unit of tefillin is a 1 day unit, right, during the daytime. Where sukkah is a 7 day unit. So we're going to compare this 1 day unit and the 7 day unit as if they're the same. So now they're going to say the following. Titania, tefillin kozman sheminichan mevarech alehem divrei Rebbe. Every time you put on your tefillin, you have to make a new bracha. So for example, either if in those days they used to often wear tefillin all day long, if you wear tefillin all day long and you take them off to go to the bathroom, you have to put them back on. When you put them back on, you make a bracha again. Or nowadays, let's say you're in the middle of davening and you have to go to the bathroom and you take off your tefillin and then you put them back on, you have to make a bracha again. So says Rebbe, and actually that's how we paskin. The rabbis say, no, only once in the morning. This is exactly the same machloket because you have a unit of a mitzvah, but you do the same action more than once. You put the tefillin on, just like you sit in the sukkah to eat multiple times a day, multiple times during the week. Every time you go on the sukkah to eat, you make a bracha l'sheba sukkah. Every time you put on the tefillin, you make a bracha al mitzvah tefillin, even if you already fulfilled the mitzvah once before. Whereas the rabbis say, no, one time for the whole unit. Same for sukkah. So basically, the fact that this Tosefta contradicts Rabbi Bar Chana doesn't really make a difference. Rabbi Bar Chana, who says sukkah shiv'ah, holds by Rebbe, and Tanakama holds like the rabbis. You know, the Tosefta. I mean, not Tanakama, the Tosefta. Itma. So now we're going to talk about. It was said that there's a machloket about how we paskin about this, about tefillin. We're now kind of in tefillin. We already have an answer to our question. It's machloket tanaim. That's how Rabbi Bar Chana can contradict the Braita, Tosefta. But now itma. Abaye amal hilchata keRebbe. The Rav amar hilchata keRabbanan. Abaye says we hold like Rebbe. Rava says the halacha is like the rabbis, which again, Rava would say only once a day for tefillin. Abaye says twice a day. This is strange. Usually we have a principle. When you have a machloket Abaye and Rava, there's only 6 cases where we hold like Abaye. This is not one of them. So it seems strange we hold like Rava, but if you read the next line, you'll understand why. Amar Rav Meri berad debat Shmuel, chazina le Rava de lo avi kishmate. I saw Rava that he actually didn't do like he claims. In other words, he says this is his opinion, but in fact, in practice, he does something else. And I'll tell you what I saw him do. Ella makdim v'kai v'aya lebeit hakisei. He gets up, he goes to the bathroom. He washes his hands. This is his daily practice. He puts on his tefillin and he makes a brach. And if he needs to do it another time, go to the bathroom, what does he do? He takes off his tefillin, doesn't say he takes it off, but it's obvious he takes them off. He puts them back on, and when he puts them back on, he makes a bracha again. So I saw that he did like Abaye said, like Rebbe, Ve'ana nami ki Rebbe Avdina, and we also hold like Rebbe, basically, umevrachin kol shiva, and then he's going to apply that same thing to Sukkah, and this is why we make a bracha on the Sukkah all 7 days. Amar Marzutra, Chazina Leila Rav Papi, another testimonial here. Marzutra says, I saw Rav Papi, Dechol Ema Temanach Tefillin Mivarech. Every time he put on tefillin, he would make a bracha even multiple times a day. Rabbanan debei Rav Ashi. Now we're going to have an even more extreme approach here. The rabbis from the house of Rav Ashi call Ema Temimash Meshe Behu Mivarche. Every time, now we're going to have to understand this word Mamash Meshe. Usually it means every time they touched it, every time they touched their tefillin, they made a new bracha. This sounds a little bit extreme. I'll tell you, there's 3 different opinions about how to understand this. One is literally every time they touched their tefillin, they made a bracha, a new one, which is strange, I would think. The second option is to say, anytime they kind of forgot they were wearing tefillin and weren't thinking about it, we call that heseh hadat, where right, it's like if you are eating and you make a bracha on your food, and then you walk away from the table and you kind of forget that you're eating, and then you decide to go back and eat again, you have to make a new bracha on your food. Same thing with tefillin. If you forget that you were wearing them and weren't really thinking about it, then you have to make a bracha again. That's opinion number 2. Opinion number 3 is that unless it was dislodged, you actually don't make a bracha. But if it dislodges from its place and you put it back in its place, then you make a bracha again. So there's 3 different ways to understand what the rabbis in the house of Rav Ashi did that. Okay, now, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So now we're going back. I don't know why they repeat this, but maybe because they're trying to give some other opinions. So they go back to Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel's position, which is specifically now they're talking only about lulav. We're moving off of sukkah, moving to lulav. Sukkah, we've kind of established here that we're going to do sukkah all 7 days because of this opinion of Rebbe by tefillin. that you have to make a bracha each time you put them on. And then we apply that to Sukkah, and therefore we go by the opinion that Sukkah all 7 days you make a bracha. And not only 7 times, but anytime you eat within those times. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, which matches what he said on the page before, mitzvat lulav kol shiva. You make a bracha on the lulav all 7 days. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi amar yom rishon mitzvat lulav, mikam ve'elach mitzvat zkeni. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi disagrees and says, no. Mitzvat lulav is only on the first day. The rest of the days is only rabbinic, and therefore we're not going to make a bracha. By the way, you see this fits in with, he was also from Israel, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So it makes sense. He's kind of going with the Rabbi Yochanan track, which is lulav kol shiv'ah. The Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, also from Israel, kol yom mitzvat zkenim va'afilu yom rishon. Kol yom mitzvat zkenim, period. He said every day is rabbinic, meaning you don't make a bracha on lulav. Now, this is a very strange opinion, to which the Gemara questions. It says, what are you talking about every day? Afilu yom rishon, even the first day? Everybody agrees the first day is by Torah law. It says, "Ulakachtem lachem bayom harishon," right? And it doesn't say anything about temple specifically. It's true at the end of that verse. It says, "Usmachtem lefnei Hashem elokechem shivat yamim." You should be happy and rejoice before God 7 days. But we learned that means in the temple they took it for 7 days. Outside the temple they took it for 1 day, and even nowadays it would still be by Torah law. So how could you possibly say you wouldn't make a bracha on it and it's only rabbinic even on the first day? So they say, right, we know the Yom Rishon to Oraita, the first day is by Torah law. So they correct what Rabbi Yitzchak says, and they say, no, fix what he says. Ema, you should say, Bar mi Yom Rishon, other than the first day, meaning all the days except the first day. What's the problem? Well, the Gemara brought 3 opinions, right? Sukkah kol shiva, Sukkah only 1 day, and lulav kol shiva, lulav all 7 days, or lulav only 1 day, or lulav never, right? None at all. If you say that what he really meant to say was only 1 day, well, that's the exact same thing as opinion number 2. So that's their question now. Then he says exactly what Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says. They say, oh yeah, that is true. That is what he's saying. Therefore, they correct it again and say, Ema bechein amar Rabbi Yitzchak. What they meant to say was, and such says Rabbi Yitzchak. In other words, they were bringing him as a support for Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Not only did he say it, also Rabbi Yitzchak said it. Now we're going to say, so we have 2 approaches here. We have Shmuel on the one hand, who says all 7 days. We have the rabbis in Israel, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and Rabbi Yitzchak, who say just the first day. And now we're going to bring Rav's opinion. Now, Rav, right, is one of the major Emoraim. And once they say Rav's opinion, that's going to go. Af Rav Saval Kol Shiva Mitzvat Lulav, which again matches the Babylonian tradition. He was in Babylonia. He says also Kol Shiva Mitzvat Lulav. How do we know that he says this? We're going to have 2 versions. The first one's going to be quite long. The second one's going to be very short. The first version is that he didn't really say it by Lulav directly. We're going to learn it from Hanukkah. Okay, why? Whatever he says for Hanukkah is going to apply for Lulav. Why is that? Hanukkah is a mitzvah that's rabbinic. Remember, it didn't appear in the Torah. Hanukkah, it happened much later. It's a law from the rabbis. And if we make a bracha on every day of Hanukkah, then we would also make a bracha on every day of Lulav, because it would show that even on things that are Rabbanan, rabbinic laws, you make a bracha. So here we're going to see that. Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi amarav. Rabbi Chiya bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, Hamalik ner shel Chanukah tzarich levarech. When you light the candles of Hanukkah, you need to make a bracha, and he means every day. And you'll see in the continuation. Rabbi Yomi Amal, and now we're kind of quoting an entire sugya from Masechet Shabbat, where they talked about Hanukkah. We're going to basically quote the entire sugya. In fact, the end is going to be in parentheses, because it seems like whoever did the manuscript here that was used for the printer kind of maybe accidentally added a little bit more of that sugya, and some people said, no, it only quoted it until here, didn't quote all of that. But anyway, we're going to read this sugya that comes from Masechet Shabbat now. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, not only if you light Hanukkah candles, but if you see Hanukkah candles, let's say you didn't light yourself, but you see someone's Hanukkah candles burning, you also make a bracha. So now they're going to say, Mai mevarech. So now the Gemara asks, what bracha do you make? Amar Rav Yehuda, Yom Rishon hamalig mevarech shalosh, v'haro'eh mevarech shtayim. Mikam va'elach malig mevarech shtayim uro'eh mevarech echad. So you see that we have what brachas you make on day number 1 and what brachas you make on all the rest of the days, which shows that obviously you're making a bracha on all the days of Hanukkah. And even if you just made on one day, it would still show rabbinic mitzvah, and yet you make a bracha. So let's explain what Rabbi Yehuda says. On the first day, you make 3 blessings. This we know. You make lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, sha'asa nisim lavotenu, and shechianu. And all the other days, you make 2 brachot. Haro'eh, if you see the brachot, mevarech echat. What do you say? My mevarech, right? So now, they don't tell you what the echat is. The echat, obviously, we're going to get to this. This is going to be in parentheses, which is you only make sha'asa nisim. Well, we'll get that, which is because you see the candles, you're not lighting. You can't make a bracha about lighting the candles. So you make a bracha about God doing miracles. Umay mevarech, what's the bracha you're supposed to make? Baruch Asher K'shem Tzav Tzivanu la'adlik ner shel Chanukah. We're obviously talking about the one who lights the candles. He makes a bracha to light the Hanukkah candles. But what's the problem with this? We were never commanded. Commanded is, right, blessed is God who commanded us. God never commanded us to light Hanukkah candles. Doesn't say so in the Torah. So, Hechan Sivanu, right? This is always the classic question when it comes to mitzvot to Rabbanan. Where were we commanded? Mi lo tasul. It says, lo tasur min hadavar sheyigidu l'chayim small. Don't veer from what the rabbis tell you. That means if the rabbis tell you to do something, you were commanded by God to do what the rabbi said. And the rabbi said, keep Hanukkah. So you make a bracha, keep Hanukkah, about Hanukkah. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar sha'al avicha v'yagedcha. This is a pasuk from Ha'azinu. Ask your father and he'll tell you. Keinecha v'yamulach, the elders, and they will tell you. Do what the elders say, which basically is like lo tasur, but it's formulated in the positive. And why does he disagree and say, I'm not going to learn this from lo tasul? Because he's going to say that lo tasul means don't fear from what the rabbis tell you, which would only include rabbinic definitions of Torah laws. You can't, there's this big problem with this principle. If you really hold like the first opinion, which is lo tasul, comes to include all the Rabbanans, you're going to get into some trouble. For example, we have principles. If there's a doubt about a Torah situation, safek de'oraita lechumra, we're stringent. If there's a doubt about a rabbinic law, safek de'Rabbanan lekula, we're lenient. Okay, if we don't know, we go lenient. So if all Rabbanans are deoraitas, then there's no such principle because every Rabbanan is going to be a deoraita and we're always going to have to be stringent. So this raises all sorts of questions. If all Rabbanans are deoraita, then there's no such, in any issue really, not just this safek Rabbanan lekula, but in general, what is a Rabbanan if all Rabbanans become deoraitas? So some people say no, right? That's Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. He says no, you can't learn it from there. Lo tasur is things that have basis in the Torah, things that are purely rabbinic, like Hanukkah, Megillah, right? Those kind of things. Those are from a different pasuk, which is a positive commandment to keep in the ways of what they tell you. And therefore, it can be in the context of you were commanded, because you were commanded by God to listen to your elders. Therefore, if your elders say this, then we were commanded. Then we have this part in parentheses, which I kind of told you already, which is Ma'im and Ma'et. Which one don't we say? When it's said on the first day, we say 3, the second day only 2. Zman. Right? We don't say shechianu. Ema memai nes. Maybe you shouldn't say shasanisim because you already said it once. No, nes kol yom ite. There is a miracle that happens every day because the whole miracle is that it lasted 8 days. So each day it's a new miracle, and therefore you say shasanisim every day and not the shechian. Okay, that was all the first version of how do we know that Rav says you take a lulav all 7 days. That's because when it comes to Hanukkah, he says you make a bracha. Even though it's Rabbanan, it's rabbinic. Therefore, lulav also, even though the rest of the days are rabbinic, you would still make a bracha on them. But he didn't say it explicitly. According to version number 2, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak manele bahedya. He said it explicitly in the name of Rav. He said, Amal Rav kol shiva mitzvah lulav. He had it that Rav said it directly about lulav and not that we learn it from Hanukkah. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're getting back to our shechianu issue that we talked about by Sukkah. And we're not going to quote the lulav one, just the Sukkah. They're going to quote another braita that talks about this, which is almost exactly identical or is practically identical. Ha'useh sukkah latzmo. If you build a sukkah for yourself, omer baruch shechianu. Nichnas l'sheva, omer baruch asher kedishanu. Hayta asuya ve'omedet. Im yachol lechadesh badavar umevarech. Okay, there's one thing new here. Again, it says you build a sukkah for yourself, you make a shechianu. When you go to sit in the sukkah, which means really, it seems to mean eat in the sukkah and not necessarily just sit, right? That's what we do. We only when we eat, not when we just go into the sukkah. And then it says, that if you didn't build your sukkah, but you want to make a shechianu, you can add something new to your sukkah and make a shechianu then. So again, you want to have some sort of opportunity to build the sukkah. There's a debate here. What does it mean, lechadesh badavar? Lechadesh badavar means add something new. Add something new could mean adding something new, like a structural, right? Adding a new beam, adding schach, something like that. Or some commentaries say, even if you add a decoration or something minimal to the sukkah, not structural, you still will be able to make the shechianu, which is an interesting opinion. Again, we're still stuck with, but this isn't what we do. And it seems so clear cut from these Tanaitic sources. So here comes the key line, even though it's still not so clear. I saw Rav Kahana, and he said them all, meaning shechianu and l'shei b'sukkah, on the cup of kiddush. Okay? Meaning, first of all, he didn't say l'shei b'sukkah as soon as he sat in the sukkah without eating. And he said shechianu on a cup of kiddush. So it seems that over time, okay, and the Mordechai quotes, he gives a good reason. He says, what happened here? What happened is, okay, the Mordechai living in Ashkenaz around the 1300s, I believe, he said, listen, most people don't have their own sukkahs anymore. They sit in the communal sukkah. And because of that, almost nobody makes this bracha. So because of that, the bracha kind of became obsolete because nobody was really doing it because so few people built their sukkah. And it seems in a way to maybe equalize things, right? If you have some people building their own sukkah, some people not building their own sukkah, it's going to be confusing. Who makes shechianu when? So it seems that because of that, they stopped saying shechianu before when they built the sukkah, and instead they make it on kiddush. The other possibility is maybe because it seems weird. According to this, right, we always make a shechianu during kiddush, right? Or women do it when they light candles and men do it when they make kiddush in the typical, split divide between things. But what's interesting about that is that on every other holiday, you're going to be saying shechianu in kiddush. It would be weird not to say shechianu in sukkah. And the idea here is that this shechianu you make on your sukkah kind of replaces the shechianu that you make on the holiday, and that you're actually almost starting the holiday early. You're getting benefit or pleasure from starting your mitzvah earlier, and you make a bracha then and not in kiddush. So it could be because it just made this divide, not just between people who built their sukkah and people who didn't build the sukkah, but people who said shechianu in their own davening and people in their who say it all other holidays and then didn't say it in kiddush on sukkahs. It would be very weird. So it could be that that's another reason why it eventually, this minhag or this practice kind of disappeared. Okay, but it clearly nobody really does this anymore. Okay, moving on. Tanu Rabbanan. If we're already talking about mitzvot, so now they're going to have another machloket about mitzvot and a brachot of mitzvot. Hayu lefanav mitzvot harbe. If you have a lot of mitzvot to do, Omer baruch asher kedesham tzvanu al hamitzvot. You ever hear about this? Also a strange thing you probably never heard about. Right? You have a bunch of mitzvot to do, make one bracha and it covers all your mitzvot. A very general bracha. Comes Rabbi Yehuda, and this is why you never heard of this, because Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. If we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, Omer mevarech al kol echad ve'echad b'fnei atzma. You make its own bracha. Each bracha has its own unique wording. Make each bracha on each mitzvah. Amar Rabbi Zera v'item Rav Papa. Okay, Rabbi Zera, or maybe Rav Papa said, Chanina bar Papa said, Hilchata ke Rabbi Yehuda. We hold like Rabbi Yehuda. V'amar Rabbi Zera, v'item Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. We're now going to say, and furthermore, the same person said, my time to Rabbi Yehuda. What's his reason? Tichtiv Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. There's a pasuk that says, blessed is God, day, day. What's this Yom Yom? You would think, what is the simple reading of Yom Yom? Yom Yom means day and not night. That's why it says it twice, right? In case you might think Yom includes night, which we had a whole discussion. Does Yom include, right? Does day include night or not include night? But if you're going to say day, day, then clearly it's going to include only the day and not the night. But is that true? We don't make brachot at night? Of course we do. If you do a mitzvah at night, you make a bracha, right? Kiddush is a good example. You should do that at night. So, this is something you might also take for granted, but they're trying to say don't take it for granted. This is, if you do the same thing every day, you make its own bracha every single day. Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, bless God by Birchon HaMitzvah, Every day we say Birchot Torah in the morning. Why didn't yesterday cover me for today? I'm always commanded to learn Torah, right? Maybe it should command. No, every day you make your own bracha. What does that have to do with our topic? Well, Hachanami, they make a comparison and say, just like every day I make my own brachot on things I made the bracha already yesterday. Hachanami b'chol davar v'davar tenu me'ein brachotav. Likewise, every mitzvah gets its own special blessing, right? The blessings are unique to each mitzvah. You don't do this general ala mitzvah bracha. Now, furthermore, seemingly not so connected, maybe one could try to connect them. Amar Rabbi Zera v'itema Rabbi Chanina bar Papa. Again, why is this here? Because it's the same person said the following statement. Things that are God-like are not the same as things that are for man. What does this mean? Midat basar v'adam, the way people generally work, kli rekan machzik. If I pour into an empty cup, it'll hold whatever I pour into it. Maleh eno machzik. If I pour into a full cup, it'll spill over and it won't hold it. Aval midat hakadosh baruch hu, but when it comes to God, now here it doesn't mean God. It means things that are connected to God, like, for example, learning Torah. Maleh machzik rekan eno machzik. If you're full, you'll be able to get more. If you're empty, you won't be able to hold anything. Fascinating line. Shne'emal, here's an explanation. Vaya im shamoa tishma. Why does it say, right, im shamoa tishma, double language? You could just say, Haya im shamoa, right? Vaya im shamoa et mitzvotayu. Vaya im tishmu'u et mitzvotayu. Why does it say, Vaya im shamoa tishma? Im shamoa tishma. Shamoa means to learn. It also means to hear, but it also means to learn. Im shamoa, if you learn, then tishma. There's a good line for, right, learning daf yomi, learning in general. If you learn, the more you learn, the more you'll be able to learn. You'll be able to keep your learning. It'll stick with you. V'im lav lo tishma. But if you don't learn and you don't have anything in your arsenal, you're going to end up not understanding anything and not keeping it. Okay, it's not going to be retained. Davar acher, and if a different way of darshaning this, im shamoa bayashan tishma b'chadash. This is a little less daf yomi oriented. This is if you learn the old stuff, if you remind, right, you go back. Maybe it's good for daf yomi. This is why you do daf yomi multiple times for those on your first cycle, right? You have a whole life ahead of you. Do it multiple times and repeat it, because the more you go over things you learned, you'll be able to retain the new things that you learn. But if you leave all the stuff you learned and just kind of say, oh, okay, did that, I'm done, moving on, shuv lo tishma, you won't be able to retain your learning. Right? This is basically promoting, number one, promoting learning in general. Number two, promoting chazara, trying to say, review what you learned, know what you learned, and that will help you learn new things. Now we're back to the Mishnah, this strange line. And why do I say strange? Because it can be read in two different ways. And besides, it's just a strange visual to be thinking about, that when they finished in the temple, what would happen? The miyad tinokot shomtim et lulavehem ve'ochlim et rogehem. So there's two different ways to read it. Again, this is a classic example of no punctuation. What does this lead to? So Rashi understands this line as saying, miyad tinokot shomtim et lulavehem, from the hands of the children, their lulavs are grabbed, meaning the older people grab the lulavs of the children, and then they eat the children's etrogim. Okay, this is like how the ceremony in the temple ends. You would have thought it ended with more of a graceful kind of ending of the holiday. Instead, it ends with this crazy thing that all the older people come and grab from the young people, their lulavim, and they eat their etrogim. The second option, that's Rashi. Tosfot suggests, very interesting suggestion of Tosfot. Actually, let's read Tosfot together, because it's a really interesting Tosfot on Daf Memhe. So Tosfot, first he quotes Rashi. He says, so I'm going back to Memhe Amud Aleph. He says, right, the big people grab from the younger children, and they eat their etrogim. And he points out, this is not considered theft, and it's not even considered darkei shalom. There's a whole thing about you shouldn't, if a child finds something, even though it's not technically really theirs, because they can't really acquire items, but it's still, you shouldn't steal it, mishum darkei shalom, although there are ways children can acquire things, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and 2 more minutes in the sugya, or maybe 3. And he says a great line. This is why I wanted to quote it, because you find interesting minhagim buried in these texts. You can learn from here also these young men that ride on horses before the chatan. Okay, if you think about all these fun ways people would be b'sameach chatan v'kala, right? That they would make them happy. One of the things they would do is they would have jousts on horses. Okay, they fight with each other. And either he destroys his horse or he tears the other guy's clothes. He says, fascinating, shehem pturin. They're exempt from laws of damages. You don't, if you are one of these jousts for making the chatan and kala happy, because you're involved in a mitzvah, you're exempt from damages, which is fascinating. Maybe we'll remember this when we get to Nezikin, and we talk about no matter what, you're always obligated, even accidental. But if you're doing as part of a mitzvah, you're actually exempt. Fascinating law. Then he says, right, because of the mitzvah of chatan. Okay, but then he says, I don't really think, though, that that's what it's talking about. He says, yes, and I agree with you, Tova. It's a very odd minhag. Agreed. Again, you have to understand things in the context of what, time period they were living in, what was customary, right? Seeing the Gladiator movie. I mean, thankfully they weren't killing each other, but, there clearly were gladiators and things like that went on in those times. So maybe one could understand, although those were much earlier than this, but could be they still went on in those days. Okay. In any case, now we have his explanation, and he says, miyad la'alter. Immediately when the ceremony ends in the temple, what would they do? They would. They pull the lulav out from the eged, from its binding. Why? Because it's, right, halulav aroch, the sochakimbo, like a sword, right? Kids love playing sword games. The kids pull out their lulavs, they start sword fighting. And then it says, and then they would eat their etrogim, okay? And he actually, Tosfot tries to prove it from the language in the Gemara, because we just don't have time. I'm not going to go into his proof, but he's going to say because he gives a certain proof, textual proof from our sugya, which we're going to get to in a minute. Okay, so that's the two different ways of reading this. Either which way you read it, I'm going to read the sugya by Rashi. You could read the same thing according to Tosfot's reading. I don't have time to read both, right? Ideally, I would read you the sugya in two different ways, but you could try to figure out how Tosfot would read it. So now we start with the machloket. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, etrog b'shvi'i asur b'shmini mutar. In etrog, on day number 7 is forbidden. On day number 8, it's permitted, meaning the whole 7th day you can't eat your etrog. Okay, but you can eat it on day number 8. Sukkah, afilu b'shmini asura. And sukkah, you can't even benefit from on day number 8. Okay, we'll talk about why in a minute. Rish Lakish disagrees and says, Amal, etrog, afilu b'shvi'i nami mutar. After you do the mitzvah, you can use it. And he's obviously going to prove it from our Mishnah, because they were using the etrogim, right? On the 7th day. So what's the machloket first? Mar savar lemitzvah ta'it kitzai. It was designated for the purposes of the mitzvah. That's Rish Lakish. Once the mitzvah is done, it's not the whole 7th day. It's going to be sanctified. It was designated for the mitzvah. You fulfill the mitzvah, you're done. Umar savar Rabbi Yochanan holds l'kule yoma it kitzai. No, it was designated for the entire day. So during that day, right, meaning each of the days and 7th day, that whole day it's designated for a mitzvah, even if you already fulfilled the mitzvah, and that's why it's forbidden. So now Rish Lakish is going to bring a question to Rabbi Yochanan from the Mishnah. It says, Miyat tinokot, again, I'll read it like Rashi, from the hands of the tinokot, shomtim elulavehem ve'ochlim et rogehem. The older people grab. Now, why did they grab from the younger kids, right? They always say, pick on someone your own size, but it's easier to pick on someone who's younger than, right? Pick on someone your own size or someone who's weaker than you. Better to pick on the children than to pick on the older people. But my lav hu adin ligdolin, isn't it though? They could have taken from the older people. They just didn't, because it was easier to steal from the children because they were little. And therefore, it sounds like even if you took from the older people on day number 7, it would be allowed. And that goes against Rabbi Yochanan. They say, lo tinokot dafka. No, it must be only children. And therefore, why is it different children? Because it was never really designated for a mitzvah, because it was designated to children. And because of that, that's how Rabbi Yochanan answers. But if it was older people, you wouldn't be able to take their etrogim. They specifically took the young people for that reason. Now we're going to have the mirror image of the sugya, which is Igad Amri. Some people say that it was actually the reverse. Rabbi Yochanan brings a question to Rish Lakish from the Mishnah and reads it first the way we just read it at the end. Notice it talks about only taking from the children. It didn't take from grown-ups, because you can't take from grown-ups. You can't eat it on the seventh day, which would make perfect sense why they took it from the children and not from the grown-ups. So they say, no, no, Rish Lakish says, no, they could have taken from the Dolim because it was permitted according to him. But they wrote the children because they were describing what actually happened. That's what would happen. They would take it from the kids because the kids were weaker. It was easier to grab from them, but not that they would be able to take from the, not that they could take from the Gdolim. I see, Debbie, what you're saying is, I was going to mention this, by the way, it's not just a reverse from Apikomen, but it reminds us of Apikomen, of the Chutfim Matzot. And then some people said you shouldn't really steal, it teaches bad behavior, right? And there was all these debates about it. On the other hand, some people said, no, they really did steal the matzah, all part of the mitzvah. It's actually totally fine. So thanks for mentioning that. I wanted to bring it up as well. Okay. Amalei Rav Papa L'Abaye. Rabbi Yochanan. Now, one thing I totally didn't resolve, which is, I waited till we got to it here, which is, if you notice, Rabbi Yochanan said, Sukkah on the 8th day is forbidden. So, Maishna Sukkah, Maishna Etrog, why is there a difference? Amarle, Sukkah dechazia leben hashmashot, di'itra mele seudata ba'ya lemeta begava, umecha begava. If you wanted to eat close to, in ben hashmashot time, when it's maybe day, maybe night, of the end of the 7th day, if you wanted to eat then, you would have to eat in the Sukkah, because maybe it's still day number 7. Which means that if we view Ben HaShmashot as one time period that's maybe day, maybe night, since you'd have to eat there, that means it was already designated for Ben HaShmashot, which means it's already designated theoretically for day number 8, because Ben HaShmashot is possibly day number 8. So once it's designated for the mitzvah for part of day number 8, it's going to be designated for the whole day. And then you'd have to lemeta begava, to sit in it, and lemecha begava, right? Since you're going to have to then eat in it. Therefore, it could say Ben HaShmashot. And once it's designated for Ben HaShmashot, it could say Ben HaShmashot, it could say lekol Yom HaShvi'i. Then it's for the whole Shmini, the whole 8th day. But etrog, to lo chazer Ben HaShmashot, lo it could say Ben HaShmashot. When you don't fulfill the mitzvah of lula Ben HaShmashot, because maybe it's already night and then you missed your chance to do it on day number 7. So therefore, it's not designated Ben HaShmashot. It's therefore not going to be problematic. Lo it could say lekol Yom HaShvi'i. It's not problematic the whole day of the 8th. But Levi disagrees and said, Etrog afilu bashmini asul. He thinks even on the 8th day, because he says, look, if you didn't do the mitzvah of lulav on the 7th day, and it was ben hashmashot, you'd still be able to do it, because you'd have to at least try to fulfill your mitzvah. It is possibly day, and therefore he actually forbids etrog the entire 8th day as well. But the father of Shmuel said, Etrog b'shvi'i asul. No, only on the 7th day, but bashmini mutal, on the 8th day it's allowed. But however, he himself, he changed his mind and did like Levi. But Rabbi Zera, we're just kind of lining people up. Rabbi Zera held like the father of Shmuel, even though he changed his mind. Rabbi Zera held like his original opinion. Da'ama Rabbi Zera, if your etrog gets disqualified during the holiday, you actually can't eat it all 7 days, because it was designated for 7 days, but it's not designated for 8 days. Amar Rabbi Zera, he teaches us 2 things now about kids. Okay, 2 other halachot. Number 1, lo likni inish hoshana liyanuka b'yom tov hakama. Don't give your lulav as a gift to a child on the first day of Yom Tov before you fulfill your mitzvah. What's the problem? My taima. Tiyanuka miknakane. You can give a gift. You can gift a child and they can own it. But aknuye lo makne. But they're children and they can't give it back to you. So if you give them as a gift and they're supposed to give it back to you, it's not actually yours. And then you're going to end up fulfilling your mitzvah with a lulav that's not yours. And we already know you can't do that. The Amar Rabbi Zera, this is one of my favorite lines. Lo lema inish liyanuka diavina lachmidi. Don't tell a child you're going to give the child something. Like, right? You say, oh, if you do this, I'll give you, V'lo yahiv le. And then you don't fulfill your promise. Why? Good line. Mishum da'ati lagmure shikra. You're basically teaching your child to lie. You're teaching your child it's okay to lie. You should be very careful of that. Shneimar limdu l'shonam daber sheker, right? You can teach your child, right? It's very easy to teach people how to lie. So you have to be as honest as possible so that your children learn honesty. But plugged to Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. Now we're going back to their machloket to Itmal. He flees shivai etrogim b'shivai yamim. If you designate 7 etrogim each for one day of the holiday, amarav kol echad echad yotzebo ve'ochla la'alter. You fulfill your mitzvah that day, and you can immediately eat it because it was only designated for one day because you designated 7. And what do you see here? He held like Rish Lakish, you can eat it still that day. Rabbi Asi Amal, he disagreed and said, like Rabbi Yochanan, okay, you can only eat it the following day. Same exact machloket as before. Mar savar lemitzvah it's katzai, mar savar lekula yoma it katzai. Is it for the mitzvah or is it for the whole day? Okay, last part for today. We'll end a little before the bottom of the page. Anandi eat lan trei yomi. Now we're going to get into 2 days of yantif. We in Bavel, we have 2 days of yantif. Hechi avdina. What do? What about our etrog? Now, nobody took lulav and etrog on day number 8, but maybe since it's safek shvi'i, maybe it was designated for 7 days, and maybe that's the 7th day, and maybe, right, even though it's day number 8. So Amar, by shmini safek shvi'i asul. He says the 8th day, which is maybe the 7th day, it's forbidden, but she's safek shmini, but the 9th day, which is only maybe potentially the 8th day, then obviously it's going to be allowed. He says, no. You only take it 7 days, and therefore on the 8th day, it's totally fine. Okay, the halach is like Abaye, that we're going to say the 8th day, it's actually forbidden. Okay, you can't eat your etrog on day number 8 in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, that might be a little less interesting than the next halacha, which will be very interesting that we're going to start tomorrow, which is what do we do about sitting on the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeret, a very famous machloket and a very famous case of development of halacha, because what we do today, for the most part, most people does not match what the Gemara says, as we saw in a bunch of cases today, and how things change. We will get to that tomorrow. Great being back on the Zoom with everyone, and we'll meet up again tomorrow. Have a great day.